Um, so sort of like taking this back to Sudolang a little bit. So how would someone just get started using Sudolang, and then specifically, what kind of problems do you think that it's like really really well suited for?
Okay. So let's talk about the problems first, and then I'll dive into like how to get started. All right. So the problems that it's not well suited for are just simple question and answer kinds of things. Like if you just want to have a chat with your AI language model, just go and use natural language. It's fine. If you want the AI language model to basically run a program, which means keep track of state that can change over time, um, use specific interfaces with specific shapes and specific types, right? Pseudolang is going to help you a lot there. Pseudolang's interface system works really well for controlling the shape of its output and stuff like that. Its constraints and constraint-based system makes it so that you can instruct it pretty easily to always deliver a specific kind of response. For example, I frequently prompt it to always give me its answers in YAML format, and then that YAML gets interpreted by JavaScript or Python, and that is kind of hard to do just using natural language, but it's much easier with Pseudolang and some constraints. And by the way, if you have tried to do that, you probably know it's not as easy as I just made it sound to get it to just output YAML or JSON and only YAML and JSON without any explanation and all that stuff. Constraints allow you to easily direct it to do that, or more easily. But even with constraints and interfaces, very often you'll have to repeat your instructions in different ways a couple of times to make sure that it's really going to only do the JSON output or only the YAML output. But it's worth doing because if you don't do that, right, you'll get a higher rate of failures, which means you'll have to retry requests, which means you're wasting tokens and wasting money because inference is expensive still. So the kinds of problems that you want to address with it are the kinds where you have very specific IO requirements, or you have evolving state that you want to keep track of. And I want to just kind of point out that Pseudolang, just using code or pseudocode to prompt the AI language model has a couple of interesting effects. The AI naturally thinks about it, it sees the connotation of the context that you give it and relates that to its understanding of the world, its mental world model. A lot of people underestimate AIs and don't even realize they have these, but they have semantic world models, and there's associations that get triggered in different contexts. And when it sees code, one of the associations that gets triggered is this thing looks like an interface. This thing looks like a data structure or a type that I need to pay attention to. And there are keys and properties on that type, that data structure and type, which means I need to pay attention to those keys and make sure that I'm following the logic of updating that as I'm thinking through this problem. So just seeing an interface triggers that kind of a response in it. It's saying, I need to keep track of these variables. And then seeing specifically curly braces triggers kind of a code mode of thinking in the AI. And what I mean by that is when you're talking in natural language tends to be kind of informal, and you kind of say what you think off the top of your head instead of thinking things through very carefully. But seeing curly braces, and in particular, this works better with languages like JavaScript or languages that have curly braces than languages that don't, like Python. It is very good at writing Python code and stuff like that. But if you want it to understand a problem and think about it as a problem, as like a technical problem, put curly braces in your syntax, and that turns on like a little magic mode in the AI. That magic mode makes it 10 to 15% more likely to return correct answers to your prompts.
Is that something that you like that is in the Sudolang prompt, or is that just like some property of LLMs that you just happen to discover and it helps for Sudolang?
That is a property of LLMs that happened to be discovered by me and some other researchers who have been looking into prompting AI language models and how to get good results from them. So there's a whole field called prompt engineering where there's like a bunch of nerds like me that just sit here prompting AIs all day and recording results and figuring out what works and what doesn't. I've been doing that every day since 2020, the summer of 2020 when GPT-3 first came out. So maybe this is a good time to address the genesis of Sudolang a little bit, right? So I was doing that, prompting every day, playing with code in particular. I was very interested in the application of using AI language models to help build code, because I've always wanted to like replicate myself so I could do more projects more quickly and take on more challenging tasks. And one way I thought of doing that was just kind of, maybe I can just encode a lot of this stuff that I know about programming into some prompts and say, okay, this particular thing is going to be a React component, so give it some instructions related to writing good React code, right? So I've been playing with that since about 2020 and really kind of digging into that. And then I saw my friend Jake Bruckman post a tweet that he had created his own pseudocode programming language called Jargon, and he put it on GitHub. And I was like, I've been doing this for a long time. I've learned a lot about what works and what doesn't when I'm prompting AI language models with code and for code using pseudocode to kind of spell out what I want. I should record some of the stuff that I've learned and make it a language specification. So that's how that came to be. That was March of this year, I think. And it was so successful, and like formalizing that language and starting to use that particular language instead of like ad hoc with every new prompt. It was so successful. It was so good that I've now, I do close to 100% of all my programming starts with a Sudolang prompt and then turns into JavaScript or Python or Solidity smart contract code or something like that. I've also done it with C. It works with any language, basically.
So are you using Sudolang as sort of the structure, the scaffolding to get started with a larger program? So you're sort of like describing your domain, or sort of like exactly kind of the interfaces that you want to see or whatever, and then it's like doing the translation and everything and sort of setting you up for this other program? Is that sort of your workflow, or what does it look like when you're using it?
You can think of Sudolang as having 3 different workflows, right? One of them is to produce a program that is designed to run on the large language model as like a interactive chat program. So for example, things like community moderators for chat rooms, or bots that are supposed to interact with users, question and answer bots for websites, those kinds of things. Those things are designed for interactive sessions that evolve over time and have a whole conversation history. And Sudolang is really, really good at doing those things. There's an example Sudolang program called AI Friend that will guide you through the creation of a prompt for a chatbot. And it'll create the chatbot prompt for you based on your specifications. And then you can just like paste that into character.ai or something like that, and it just works really well. And then there's another mode that I call AI driven development, or AITDD, and in that mode I'm using the AI to write programs that will run in JavaScript or Solidity or Python or C or whatever. And so that's an AI driven development process, and I've got a whole big process around that goes from story mapping, user stories, figuring out your user stories and tasks and stuff like that, and organizing that, and figuring out priorities, what to do first, and writing the documentation. We do like a README driven development process, which means we write documentation for all the interfaces before we start implementing the interfaces, and then our teams can work in parallel. Now imagine that you do the same thing, except all of that stuff is written by the AI, including the documentation, including the requirements and all that stuff. And then the AI delegates those tasks to other AI, and they do the things like writing. So we have a special module for writing Redux to handle client-side state. We have a special module for writing React components, and a special module for writing smart contracts and Solidity and so on. And it's just like each one of those has a particular specialty, and the AI drives that process. And that one we're working into more of an agent framework. And hopefully in the future, that will become a very, very important workflow. It's a little bit early for agent frameworks because they still require a lot of handholding. They still make lots of mistakes. Language models hallucinate a lot, and that's something to account for. And they can also get stuck. And there's lots of challenges with context and attention windows and stuff like that I could go into a lot of technical detail about, but I probably won't bore you right now. But if you're curious, reach out and I can teach you all about that. And then another mode is, what I just described, I call metaprogramming, where you write programs that write programs, right? And then the last mode is just transpiling, where you prompt the AI with pseudocode that is designed to be transpiled into another language, and you just transpile that Sudolang into JavaScript or Python or whatever. So basically, you're just writing the program that you would have written anyway, but you write it in pseudocode instead of your target language, and then it transpiles automatically. And that's really good for things like I was telling you about, where you have logic in both JavaScript and smart contract programming language, and you want to transpile it to both places, and you only want to write the thing once. But it's also really good for just writing raw JavaScript, because I can write like a 5-line JavaScript React, or a 5-line Sudolang React component that'll expand into 60 lines of JavaScript. And so it can take like a few minutes and do something that would have taken me 20 or 30 minutes in raw JavaScript.